The forest was alive with strange sounds, a place where human soldiers rarely dared to enter. Tall trees whispered in the wind, their leaves glowing faintly under the twin suns. The ground was damp, and the air carried a faint hum of alien energy. Among those trees walked Commander Arik, a human warrior known for his courage and his scars. His black armor carried marks from countless battles, but his eyes burned with the same fire as when he first picked up a sword. The humans had come to this world not for conquest, but for survival. Their colonies were weak, their numbers small, and the galaxy was filled with stronger races who thought of them as nothing more than prey. Among those powers was the mighty Zarion Empire, ruled by an alien king whose word was law across many star systems. To him, humans were dust beneath his feet. Yet destiny had a strange way of changing kings into beggars and outcasts into heroes. Arik's patrol had been long and silent until he heard a sound that froze him. It was not the roar of a beast or the hiss of alien weapons. It was a soft cry, trembling and filled with pain. He raised his weapon and followed the sound through the thick trees. The forest opened into a small clearing where a figure sat on the ground. She was unlike anything he had seen. Her long hair glowed faintly in the light, her ears sharp like a fox's and a great fur tail coiled behind her. She wore a simple garment made of rough fur, torn as if she had been fleeing through the wild. Her eyes met his, filled with both pride and sorrow. For a moment, Arik forgot he was in enemy lands. She was no soldier. She was someone who carried the weight of shame and exile. "I do not fear you, human," she whispered, her voice steady even as her hands trembled. Arik lowered his weapon slightly. He was trained to be cautious, yet something about her words drew him closer. "Who are you?" he asked. The girl lifted her chin, though tears clung to the corners of her eyes. "I was once a princess, the daughter of the Zarian king, but now I am nothing. He cast me out, stripped me of honor, and left me to die in these woods." The words struck Arik harder than any blade. The king of Zarian was the one who had ordered attacks on human colonies, the one responsible for countless deaths. And now his own daughter sat in the dirt, disowned and abandoned. Arik's instincts told him to leave her. She was alien, and her bloodline was drenched in human suffering. Yet his heart whispered something else. She was not the enemy here. She was a victim of a king's pride, and perhaps a key to something greater. Before he could speak, the forest trembled. Heavy footsteps crushed leaves and branches. Shadows moved among the trees, hunters sent by the king. The girl's ears twitched, and fear flashed across her face. "They come for me," she said. "If you are wise, you will leave now." But Arik did not move. He gripped his blade tighter and stepped in front of her. His armor gleamed faintly under the forest light. "If they want you, they will have to pass through me." For the first time, the girl's eyes softened. A spark of hope flickered within them, and though the hunters drew closer with every step, she could not help but whisper a truth that surprised even her. "Perhaps humans are not as weak as my father believed." The sound of alien war horns echoed through the forest, and Arik knew this was only the beginning. The unexpected war was about to start, not for land, not for conquest, but for the fate of an abandoned daughter and the regret of a king who had underestimated both her and humanity. The war horns grew louder, rolling through the forest like thunder. Birds burst from the treetops and the ground shook under the weight of marching soldiers. Arik stayed still, his hand gripping the hilt of his sword as his eyes scanned the shadows. He knew the Zarion hunters would not stop until they had the girl. She crouched behind him, her tail brushing the damp earth, her breaths shallow and quick. Pride still glimmered in her gaze, but fear was there too, thinly hidden beneath her strength. Arik could see she was not trained for combat. She was a survivor, not a fighter. "Stay behind me," he said without looking back. "I will not hide." "Like a coward," she replied, her voice sharp, though her hands shook. Arik allowed a faint smile to cross his face. "Then don't hide, but don't throw your life away either." The first of the hunters stepped into the clearing. Tall figures clad in dark armor, their helmets shaped like the heads of beasts. Each carried long spears that hummed with alien energy. Their eyes glowed faintly through their masks, and when they saw Arik standing before the girl, they stopped as if struck by confusion. A human soldier. Alone. The leader lowered his spear and pointed at Arik. "Step aside, human. This does not concern you." Arik's voice was calm, but his stance was unyielding. "She's under my protection now." The hunters laughed, the sound cruel and metallic. "A broken daughter is not worth dying for. She carries no crown, no throne. Her life is nothing." Arik shifted his blade into position. "Then you will have no reason to fight me, unless your pride demands it." The leader hissed, then gave a sharp signal. 2 hunters charged forward, their spears cutting the air with deadly speed. Arik's sword flashed in the forest light, striking against metal with a ringing clash. Sparks flew, and mud splattered as the 3 figures moved in a deadly dance. The warrior girl watched, her heart pounding. She had seen warriors before, but never like this. Humans were supposed to be weak, fragile things that survived only in numbers. Yet here was one man holding his ground against trained Zarian hunters. His movements were precise, his strikes fueled by something deeper than survival. One hunter fell with a cry as Arik's blade cut through the gaps in his armor. The second staggered back, his weapon broken. Arik turned, breathing heavy but unshaken. The leader stepped forward now, his spear glowing brighter, energy humming along its shaft. "You will regret this," he snarled. Arik raised his sword once more. His arms ached, his armor felt heavier with each passing moment, but he refused to move aside. He had seen too many innocents abandoned in the name of kings and empires. He would not abandon this girl. Their weapons clashed again, the sound echoing through the forest. The leader struck with fury, but Arik met every blow with steel and will. Mud sprayed beneath their boots as they fought, neither giving ground. Finally, with a sharp twist, Arik forced the spear aside and pressed his blade against the leader's chest. Silence fell. The other hunters hesitated, unsure whether to attack or retreat. "Leave," Arik growled. "Tell your king his daughter lives, and tell him a human stands in her defense." The leader's eyes burned with rage, but he gave a signal. Slowly the hunters withdrew, melting back into the forest shadows. Arik lowered his sword, his breath ragged. He turned to the girl, who stared at him with wide, shining eyes. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why would you risk everything for me?" Arik sheathed his blade. "Because your father left you to die, and because someone has to show him what regret feels like." For the first time since her exile, the girl felt something she thought she had lost forever. Hope. And in that hope, dangerous bond was beginning to form. The forest grew quiet again, but the silence was uneasy. Arik knew the hunters would return. They had tasted defeat, and the king's pride would not allow them to leave this matter unsettled. He sheathed his blade but kept his hand close to the hilt. His eyes scanned the trees, listening for any movement. The girl sat on the damp earth, her fur clothing torn at the edges, her tail twitching nervously. Her prideful mask had slipped for a moment, and her exhaustion showed. Arik crouched beside her, his voice steady but not unkind. "You can't stay here," he said. "Your father will send more. Next time it won't just be hunters. It'll be soldiers, maybe even assassins." Her eyes glimmered with defiance. "Then let them come. I will not crawl to him and beg." Arik studied her. She spoke like royalty, even in exile. Her chin lifted as if daring the world to break her. But he also saw something else. Loneliness. The kind of loneliness that ate at the heart until nothing was left. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, then spoke softly, almost as if ashamed. "Liara." The name lingered in the air, fragile yet strong. Arik nodded. "Liara, if you want to survive, you'll need to move. There are caves in the northern cliffs, hard to reach but safe." Liara's ears twitched. "And what will you do once you lead me there, human? Leave me like my father did?" Arik looked at her directly. "No, I don't leave people behind. Not anymore." For a moment she couldn't answer. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not as a princess, not as an exile, just as a person. She lowered her gaze, unsure of how to respond. The two began their journey north, weaving through the thick forest. Mist curled around the trees, and strange lights glimmered between branches. Wild energy that made the land alive. Liara struggled to keep pace. Her body weakened from days of wandering alone. Arik slowed his steps, never showing impatience. He carried himself with the steady strength of a man used to hardship. As night fell, they found shelter under a massive tree with roots like walls. Arik built a small fire, its flames pushing back the darkness. Liara sat across from him, her eyes reflecting the light. "You fight like no human I have seen," she said at last. Arik gave a small shrug. "Humans fight best when we have something worth fighting for." Liara tilted her head. "And what do you fight for?" He stared into the fire. The flames reminded him of home, of the colony reduced to ash by Zarion ships. His voice was low, heavy with memory. "For the ones I lost, for the ones I can still protect." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackle of fire and the distant calls of night creatures. Liara studied him carefully. There was no fear in his eyes, no hesitation. He was not bound by titles or crowns. He was bound by choice. Finally, she spoke. "You are strange, Arik. My father would call you weak for speaking of loss. Yet, I think it makes you stronger." Arik looked at her, his face lit by firelight. "Your father rules with fear. Fear can make empires, but it can also break them. He will regret what he's done to you." Liara's breath caught. The words stirred something inside her, a mixture of anger and longing. For the first time, she wondered if her exile could be more than punishment. Maybe it could be the beginning of something her father could never control. Suddenly, a distant horn echoed again, cutting through the night air. Arik stood instantly, hand on his sword. Liara's tail stiffened, her ears alert. The hunters had returned faster than expected. This time, they would not come only for her. They would come for him too, for the human who dared defy their king, and in that moment, Liara realized her father's greatest mistake was not only disowning her. It was underestimating the bond now forming between his daughter and a human warrior who refused to bow. The horn echoed again, closer this time. The forest seemed to hold its breath as the sound rolled through the night. Arik's eyes scanned the darkness, every muscle in his body tense. He had fought before, but he knew these enemies would not make the same mistake twice. Liara crouched lower, her fur tail twitching nervously, her ears straining to catch every movement. She knew the hunters of her father well. They were not just soldiers. They were trackers bred to find and kill without mercy. If they had her scent, they would not stop until she was in chains or dead. Arik tightened the straps of his armor, his sword resting in his hand. "They've regrouped," he muttered, "and they're hunting smarter this time." Liara's voice was quiet but sharp. "They will not stop. My father's pride is greater than his mercy. To him, I am a stain to be erased." Arik turned toward her. His eyes were steady, not shaken by fear. "Then we make them regret chasing you." Before Liara could respond, a rustle split the night. Figures moved between the trees, their glowing eyes shining through the dark like fireflies. The hunters were closing in from three sides, pushing them toward the river that cut through the forest. Arik realized quickly what they intended. "They're hurting us," he whispered. The leader of the hunters stepped forward, his spear glowing faintly with blue energy, his voice carried like steel in the night air. "Human, you were warned. Stand aside and you may live." Arik raised his sword, firelight glinting along the blade. "I don't stand aside. Not for tyrants. Not for cowards." The hunters let out a low growl, their armor clinking as they advanced. Arik moved into position, his stance balanced, ready for the storm. Liara's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to fight, but she had no weapon, no training. Still, she could not simply Watch. The first wave of hunters lunged forward. Arik met them with a roar, his blade flashing through the dark. Sparks lit the night as steel struck against alien metal. He moved with precision, blocking a spear and striking with swift counterattacks. One hunter fell, then another, but more. Pressed in, Liara watched in awe and fear. The human fought like a storm, his armor battered yet unyielding. She remembered her father's words. Humans were weak, unworthy of respect. But here was one human standing alone against an elite squad of Zarion hunters. Every strike was proof that her father had been wrong, but even Arik could not hold forever. A spear grazed his shoulder, burning against his armor. Another strike forced him back a step. His breath grew heavier, his body slowing from the endless assault. Liara's eyes darted around the clearing. She spotted a fallen spear near the roots of a tree. Without thinking, she scrambled forward, grabbing the weapon. The weight was heavy in her hands, but she raised it with trembling arms. When a hunter broke past Arik's defense and lunged toward his unguarded side, Liara thrust the spear forward. The tip drove into the hunter's chest and he collapsed with a guttural cry. Liara froze, her breath sharp, her hands shaking as the spear slipped from her grasp. Arik turned, his eyes wide for just a moment. "You saved me," he breathed. Before Liara could answer, the leader snarled and advanced. His spear glowed brighter than before, power building along its length. "Enough," he roared. "I will end this insult to my king myself." Arik stepped forward, planting himself between Liara and the leader. "Come then," he growled. "Let your king feel regret through you." The two clashed with a force that shook the ground. Sparks burst with every strike, their weapons cutting through air and firelight. Liara could only watch, torn between fear and hope as the battle raged before her. And in that moment, as the fire cracked and the forest trembled, she understood the truth. Her father had disowned her to protect his pride. But this human was willing to risk everything for her, a stranger, and that was something her father would never understand, until the day it destroyed him. The clearing became a battlefield of firelight and steel. Arik and the hunter leader clashed again and again, their weapons ringing through the night. Sparks scattered into the air as sword struck spear, each blow heavier than the last. Liara stood frozen for a moment, her chest heaving as she gripped the fallen spear she had used. She had never taken a life before. Her heart raced, but when she looked at Arik still standing against the leader, she felt something new, resolve. The hunter leader moved with deadly speed, his spear cutting arcs of blue energy through the air. Arik blocked one strike, then another, but the force behind them shook his arms and rattled his bones. The alien was stronger, faster, and trained to kill. Arik's blade was chipped, his armor scarred, yet his stance never broke. "You fight well, human," the leader hissed, "but you are only flesh. Flesh tears. Flesh breaks." Arik spat blood from his lip and tightened his grip. "Then let's see who breaks first." The leader lunged, his spear thrusting straight for Arik's chest. At the last moment, Arik twisted, letting the tip scrape past his side as he drove his blade upward. The sword carved a deep line across the alien's shoulder, sending him stumbling back with a roar. The other hunters hissed but did not move forward. They circled the fight, watching as if this duel was sacred. To interfere would mean dishonor. Arik's chest rose and fell, sweat dripping from his brow. His body screamed for rest, but he forced his legs to hold steady. Liara's eyes followed, every movement, her ears twitching with each clash. She wanted to help, but fear bound her feet. The leader's rage grew, his strikes faster, his spear glowing brighter with each blow. He battered Arik's defenses, forcing him backward step by step. Finally, with a brutal swing, he shattered part of Arik's sword, leaving the blade shorter. Liara gasped, clutching the spear tighter. Arik dropped to one knee, his broken sword trembling in his grip. The leader raised his weapon high, ready to finish him. "No!" Liara cried. Without thinking, she ran forward. Her hands shook, but she raised the spear and swung with all the strength she had. The weapon cracked against the leader's arm, forcing his strike off balance. The blow missed Arik by inches, slicing into the ground instead. The leader turned, in fury, eyes burning at Liara. "You dare," he snarled. Arik surged up with a roar, his broken sword driving forward into the gap in the leader's armor. The blade pierced deep and the leader staggered, choking in disbelief. The hunters around them froze. Their commander fell to his knees, the glow fading from his spear, before collapsing into the dirt. Silence swept the clearing. Arik leaned on, his sword, his breath ragged, his body trembling. Liara stood beside him, her chest heaving, the spear slipping from her grasp. For the first time she felt power in her hands, not the power of royalty, but the power of choice. The remaining hunters exchanged uneasy glances. Without their leader, the honor of the fight was broken. One by one they backed away into the shadows, leaving the clearing behind. Arik sank against the roots of a tree, blood seeping from his side. Liara rushed to him, kneeling beside his battered form. Her hands shook as she pressed the fur of her garment against the wound to slow the bleeding. "Why did you do this?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "You could have left me. You almost died because of me." Arik's gaze met hers, steady even through pain. "Because someone had to show your father that his choices have consequences, and because you deserved a chance to live." Liara's throat tightened. No one had ever spoken those words to her. Not her father, not her people. For the first time, she felt the weight of her exile begin to lift. She looked at Arik, battered but unbroken, and a thought burned in her heart. Her father had disowned her, believing she was worthless, but this human had risked everything for her. And in that moment, she swore that her father would learn regret, not just through Arik's blade, but through her will as well. The forest was quiet once more, but Liara knew peace would not last. Her father's pride was a storm, and tonight had only made it fiercer. And when that storm came, she would be ready, because she was no longer alone. The night slowly faded into dawn. The forest glowed with soft light as the suns rose over the horizon. Mist hung low between the trees and the air was heavy with silence. Arik leaned against the roots of the great tree, his wound bound by strips of cloth torn from his armor. His body ached, but his spirit was unbroken. Liara sat close to him, her tail curled around her legs. She had not slept. Every time her eyes closed, she saw the hunter's glowing eyes and the flash of weapons. But more than that, she saw Arik standing in front of her again and again, refusing to fall. "You should rest," Arik said, his voice rough but calm. Liara shook her head. "I cannot. They will return. My father's fury will not end with hunters." Arik studied her face. Even exhausted, there was strength in her eyes, a fire that was only growing brighter. "Then we don't wait for them to come. We move first." Liara blinked in surprise. "Move first? Against the Zarion Empire? Against my father?" Arik pushed himself to sit straighter, though pain flashed across his face. "Your father thinks he ended your worth when he disowned you. But I see something different. You are proof that his empire is not unbreakable. If he can betray his own blood, then his rule is weaker than he wants anyone to believe." Liara's ears twitched. No one had ever spoken of her father like that. He was the king, untouchable, feared across worlds, but Arik's words struck deep. "What do you suggest, human?" she asked. Arik's eyes narrowed, his jaw set with resolve. "We don't run forever. We gather allies. Others have suffered under your father's rule, humans, smaller clans, outcasts. Together, we make him face what he fears most, regret." For the first time, Liara did not feel like an exile. She felt like someone with a purpose. "You would stand against a king for me?" Arik gave a faint smile. "Not just for you. For everyone who deserves better." Before Liara could answer, a distant rumble shook the forest. Birds scattered from the treetops, and the ground quivered under heavy movement. Arik's eyes sharpened. "They're moving troops," he said. "That's no hunting party. That's an army." Liara's heart tightened. Her father had learned of her survival. and now he would bring his wrath down upon them both. Arik rose to his feet slowly, gripping his sword, though his wound made every step heavy. We can't stay here. The caves and the cliffs, if we reach them, we can hold ground and plan our next move. Liara helped him up, supporting his weight with her arm. Though her body trembled, she felt strength she had not known before. Together, they pushed north, moving through the thick undergrowth as the sound of marching grew louder behind them. Hours passed, and finally, the forest gave way to rocky terrain. Towering cliffs rose before them, jagged and dark, their surfaces glistening with morning dew. The caves yawned like black mouths, promising both shelter and danger. Inside the largest cave, they found space enough to rest. Arik slumped against the wall, his breath ragged but steady. Liara knelt beside him, dipping her hands into a stream that trickled through the rocks. She cleaned his wound carefully, her touch gentle despite her inexperience. "You are reckless," she said softly. "Reckless and foolish, and yet—" Her voice wavered. "I would not be alive without you." Arik met her gaze, his eyes tired but unwavering. "Then live. That's all the thanks I need." For a moment, the silence between them felt heavier than any words. Liara's heart beat faster and she turned away, unsure of what stirred inside her. Outside the cave, the sound of drums rolled across the land. The Zarian army had arrived, their banners rising like a dark storm against the dawn. Liara's ears flattened as she stared toward the horizon. She could almost feel her father's pride burning in the distance, demanding her capture, demanding her silence. But she was no longer the broken daughter he had cast aside. She clenched her fists, her voice a whisper filled with fire. "Father, this time it is you who will regret." The cliffs stood like ancient guardians, their black stone walls jagged against the sky. From inside the cave, Arik and Liara could hear the drums echoing across the land. The Zarian army was advancing, their march steady and merciless. Arik pressed, his hand against the wound at his side, forcing himself to stay upright. Pain shot through him, but he refused to show weakness. Liara watched him with worry, her tail flicking nervously, her ears sharp to every sound. "They will surround these cliffs," she said. "If we stay here, we will be trapped." Arik shook his head. "These caves are narrow. Their numbers will mean less here. If they want us, they'll have to fight us one by one." Liara frowned. "That is not a plan. That is waiting for death." Arik managed a tired smile. "Sometimes survival means making death work harder to reach you." She stared at him, frustrated and yet strangely moved. No soldier of her father's would have spoken with such grim humor in the face of certain death. Humans were different, this one especially. As the sun dipped lower, shadows stretched across the cliffs. Torches lit up in the distance as the army drew near. The sound of their voices carried on the wind, hundreds of soldiers, maybe more. Liara felt her chest tighten. "He sent an army for me," she whispered. Arik's gaze hardened. "Not just for you. For pride. A king who abandons his daughter cannot afford for her to live. You're a reminder that he is not infallible. That makes you more dangerous than 1,000 soldiers." Her heart pounded at his words. She had thought herself weak, discarded, worthless. But Arik made her see what her father feared. Not her failure, but her survival. As darkness settled, the first wave of soldiers approached the cliffs. Their armor gleamed under torchlight, their banners whipping in the wind. They shouted her father's name as if it were a weapon. Arik rose, steadying himself with his sword. His armor was cracked, his strength worn, but his spirit blazed like fire. He stood at the cave entrance, blocking the path. Liara stood beside him, clutching the stolen spear she had carried since the night of the hunt. "You don't have to fight," Arik told her softly. Liara shook her head. "I will not hide behind you. Not anymore." The first group of soldiers charged up the narrow ledge. Their blades flashed, their war cries filling the air. Arik met them head-on, his sword ringing as it struck their weapons aside. His movements were slower than before, but every strike was fueled with purpose. Liara thrust her spear forward, clumsy but fierce. She caught one soldier off guard, knocking him from the ledge. Another lunged at her, but Arik stepped between them, his blade cutting the enemy down in a single arc. The fight was brutal. Blood splashed across stone, sparks flying as steel clashed. The narrow ledge worked to their advantage. Only 2 or 3 soldiers could attack at once. Arik and Liara fought shoulder to shoulder, their breaths ragged, their bodies trembling. But they did not yield. The soldiers retreated for a moment, regrouping below. Shouts echoed as commanders barked orders, preparing the next wave. Liara leaned against the wall, her chest heaving. Her fur clothing was torn, her hands bruised, but her eyes blazed brighter than ever. She looked at Arik, who was covered in blood and sweat, yet still standing tall. "You fight for me as if I matter," she said softly. Arik turned his gaze to her, his voice steady despite the exhaustion. "You do matter. To me, to the future. Your father may not see it, but I do." Her throat tightened, and for a moment she could not speak. No one had ever said such words to her. Below, the drums began again. A larger force was moving. Torches spread across the cliffs like fire ants. The full weight of the king's wrath was coming. Liara tightened her grip on the spear. For the first time since her exile, she felt not like prey but like a warrior. She raised her chin, her voice fierce. Then let him come, let him see his daughter stand with a human, let him regret. And as the army roared and surged toward the cliffs, Arik and Liara braced themselves for the storm. The cliffs shook under the fury of the Zarian army. Drums thundered like the heartbeat of war, echoing across the land. From the cave entrance, Arik and Liara watched as wave after wave of soldiers gathered below, their torches lighting the night like a sea of fire. Arik's grip tightened around his sword. His armor was cracked, his wounds deep, but his spirit remained unbroken. Beside him, Liara stood with her spear, her fur clothing torn, her hair wild from battle. She no longer looked like a cast-out princess. She looked like someone who had chosen to fight. "They are too many," Liara whispered, her ears twitching nervously. Arik nodded. "Yes, but too many soldiers on a narrow path makes them weak. They'll crush each other trying to reach us." Down below, a Zarian commander raised his blade, signaling the next attack. Dozens of soldiers began climbing the rocky ledge toward the cave. Their armor clanked, their weapons glinted in the torchlight. Arik stepped forward, blocking the path with his body. "Stay close," he told Liara. The first enemy reached him. Arik's sword clashed against the soldier's axe, sparks flying as he forced the enemy back with raw strength. Another soldier lunged, and Liara thrust her spear forward, driving him off the ledge with a scream. The battle raged again. Steel rang against steel, blood darkened the rocks, and the narrow ledge became a graveyard. Arik moved like a wall of iron, each strike precise, each step unyielding. Liara fought beside him, her strikes clumsy but fierce, her courage growing with every enemy she felled. But for every soldier that fell, 2 more seemed to climb. Their numbers were endless, their chants echoing her father's name. Liara's chest heaved, her arms ached, but she refused to falter. Each time she thought of giving in, she remembered her father's cold eyes as he disowned her. She remembered his voice declaring her worthless, and she fought harder. Arik, though, was weakening. Blood seeped from his side where the wound had reopened. His breath came in ragged gasps and his sword swings grew heavier. Still, he pressed forward, his determination stronger than his failing body. The soldiers began to hesitate. Whispers spread among them, fear of the human who would not fall, of the disowned princess who fought at his side. Doubt crept into their ranks. Then a roar silenced everything. The army parted, and a towering figure emerged from the darkness. His armor was black and gold, his crown gleaming under the torchlight. His presence made the soldiers drop to their knees in reverence. Liara's heart stopped. Her father had come. The alien king stood at the base of the cliffs, his eyes burning with fury. His voice carried across the rocks, cold and merciless. "Daughter, he thundered. You dare defy me? Liara's hands shook, but she did not lower her weapon. Her voice rose above the drums, strong though her heart trembled. You cast me aside, father. You called me nothing, but here I stand, alive, fighting for what you will never understand. The king's gaze turned to Arik. And you, human, you think yourself her savior? You are but an insect. I will crush you both, and your defiance will be erased. Arik lifted his broken blade, his voice steady despite the blood on his lips. You'll regret underestimating her. You'll regret underestimating humanity. The king's eyes narrowed, his fury deepening. With a gesture, he ordered his soldiers to step aside. He began climbing the cliffs himself, his massive form moving with terrifying strength. The ground shook under his steps. Liara's chest tightened. This was no longer just survival. This was the moment everything would be decided. Her worth, her father's pride, Arik's sacrifice. The alien king was coming for them. And for the first time in her life, Liara was ready to face him. The air grew heavy as the alien king climbed the cliffs. Each step he took sent small rocks tumbling down, his massive frame wrapped in black and gold armor. The soldiers below watched in silence, too afraid to move while their king advanced. The torches flickered, casting his shadow high against the cliff walls. Arik stood at the mouth of the cave, his broken sword clutched tightly in his hand. His chest rose and fell with ragged breaths, but his eyes never wavered. Beside him, Liara gripped her spear, her ears flat, her heart pounding. She had always feared her father's gaze, but now she met it head-on. The king's voice rolled across the rocks like thunder. My blood betrayed me. My daughter chose shame, and a human dares to stand where only kings may stand. Liara stepped forward, though her legs trembled. You disowned me, father. You called me worthless. But you are wrong. I am stronger than you believe because I fight for something greater than pride. The king's eyes burned with cold fury. You are nothing without my crown, and you— He pointed his blade at Arik. You are a fool to throw away your life for her. Arik raised his sword, his voice steady. Better a fool who protects the innocent than a king who abandons his own blood. The words echoed, and for a moment, the soldiers below shifted uneasily. Never had anyone dared speak to their king that way. With a roar, the king lunged up the last ledge, landing before them with crushing force. His blade was massive, carved from alien steel, glowing faintly with energy. Arik met the strike with his broken sword, the impact shaking the ground beneath their feet. The duel began. The king swung with brutal power, each strike enough to shatter stone. Arik blocked, parried, twisted away, but each movement cost him strength. His wound burned, his muscles screamed, yet he refused to fall. Liara struck when she could, her spear darting toward her father. The king knocked it aside with contempt, his eyes filled with rage at her defiance. You raise your hand against me, child, after all I gave you? Liara's voice cracked, but her resolve did not. You gave me nothing but shame. He gave me hope. Arik saw the opening. With a roar, he drove forward, his sword striking across the king's chest plate. Sparks flew, leaving a deep scar across the golden armor. The king staggered back, his eyes wide in shock. The soldiers below gasped. Their king, wounded by a human. Fury replaced his surprise. The king struck harder, faster, each blow sending Arik closer to the edge. The broken sword chipped further, nearly snapping in half. Arik's knees buckled, his body near collapse. The king raised his massive blade high, ready to end it. This is the cost of defiance. But Liara stepped between them, spear raised. Her voice rang out, fierce and unshaken. No, father, this is the cost of your pride. She thrust her spear upward. The tip pierced the weak spot in his armor at the joint of his arm. The king roared in pain, his blade crashing down wildly. Arik twisted, his sword slicing across the gap Liara had opened. The blade drove deep, cutting through armor and flesh. The alien king staggered, dropping to one knee. His crown slipped, clattering against the stone. Silence fell across the cliffs. The soldiers below stared in disbelief. Auric stood over him, bloodied and broken, his sword shaking in his grip. "This ends now." The king's gaze lifted, filled with both fury and fear. For the first time he looked small, not a ruler, but a man brought low by his own choices. Liara stepped beside Auric, her voice cold and sharp. "You called me nothing, but it is you who will be remembered with regret." The king's roar faded into silence as he collapsed onto the stone. The army below stood frozen, awaiting what came next. And for the first time in her life, Liara felt the weight of power. Not as a princess disowned, but as a daughter who had faced her father and survived. The alien king lay motionless on the cold stone, his crown rolling into the dust. The sound of the battle drums faded into silence. Below the cliffs, thousands of soldiers stood frozen, their eyes locked on the fallen figure of the ruler they had feared all their lives. Auric swayed on his feet, his broken sword still clutched tightly in his hand. Blood stained his armor, his body trembling from exhaustion. He felt every wound, every bruise, but he refused to collapse. Beside him, Liara stood tall, her spear still in her grip, her chest heaving but her gaze unbroken. For the first time, she looked down upon her father not as his daughter, but as his judge. The soldiers shifted uneasily, whispers spreading like fire through the ranks. They had seen their invincible king wounded by a human and defied by the daughter he had disowned. Fear gave way to doubt, and doubt gave way to something more dangerous: hesitation. Liara stepped forward, raising her voice so that it carried across the cliffs. "You followed a king who ruled with pride and fear. But pride has fallen, and fear has failed him. Look at me, your abandoned princess. Look at the human who stood where none of you dared. The future does not belong to his cruelty. It belongs to courage, to loyalty, to hope." Her words echoed down the cliffs, striking the soldiers deeper than any blade. Some lowered their weapons, others bowed their heads. No one moved against her. Auric's knees nearly buckled, but Liara caught his arm, steadying him. Her eyes softened, filled with something she had never allowed herself to feel before: trust. "You've done enough," she whispered. "Rest. I will carry the rest." Auric managed a faint smile. "I told you. Your father would regret. Now he has." She guided him back into the cave, where he collapsed against the wall, his body finally giving way to exhaustion. She tore more fabric from her fur garment, binding his wounds as best she could. Every movement was gentle, careful, as though she feared losing the one person who had given her back her strength. Outside, the soldiers slowly began to withdraw. Without their king's command, their unity was broken. Some left in silence. Others knelt briefly before turning away. The cliffs, once filled with the thunder of an army, now grew quiet. Liara stood at the cave's edge, watching them fade into the horizon. For years she had lived in the shadow of her father's pride. Tonight that shadow was gone. In its place, a new fire burned within her, one that no crown could give or take away. She turned back to Auric, who stirred weakly, his eyes opening to meet hers. "They followed you," he murmured. "They listened." Liara knelt beside him, brushing dirt and blood from his face. "No, they followed us. You showed them that a human could stand against a king, and I showed them that a daughter could rise against her father's shame." For a moment, silence lingered, filled only by the soft crackle of the fire inside the cave. Then, for the first time since her exile, Liara smiled. It was not the smile of a princess or a victim, but of someone who had found her place. "Perhaps," she said softly, "this is not an ending, but a beginning." Auric closed his eyes, exhaustion finally pulling him toward sleep. "A beginning worth fighting for," he whispered. Liara looked out once more at the horizon where the twin suns were rising, painting the sky with gold and crimson. Her father was gone, but his empire still stretched across the stars. There would be battles ahead, struggles yet to come. But she was no longer afraid. The alien king had disowned her. A human had made him regret. And now, together, they would shape a new destiny. One not built on pride, but on hope. The dawn lit the cliffs, and the future began.